growing up, I always wanted to be the main character in a Disney movie. I wanted to be that unlikely hero that, like Simba or Aladdin or even Mulan. They were underestimated, misunderstood, but eventually they come in and they save the day. And for the record, I'm nailing the first two parts, but haven't quite figured out how to quite save the day. I've always been different in my mind, and primarily I feel like that is because as a biracial kid, I never really felt like I belonged in any one community, not the black or the white. And because my family didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up, when I was younger, a lack of self-worth kind of developed. Society underestimated me, or at least I thought so, and so outwardly I did all I could to really prove I was capable of greatness. And even though inside I was struggling, and this happened even though inside I was struggling with low self-esteem. A bit of background information about me. I'm one of four kids. As I said, I'm biracial, so my mom's white and my dad's black. I was born and raised in Sonoma County, and my parents moved there prior to me actually being, or prior to it being this rich wine country that we know today. So if anyone is unfamiliar about the area, it's relatively homogeneous, ethnically homogeneous. So there's pockets of diversity, generally speaking, but overall it's pretty, pretty white. I'll touch on that a little bit more in a second, but generally speaking, I was from a very financially unstable background. And some people would say, there's no place like home. But when I close my eyes and I click my heels 3 times, I have nowhere to go. We moved more than 20 times before I was 18 years old. And these were not like planned moves, but there were more times than not when they were forced decisions. And it wasn't like we moved down the street. Oftentimes this was across the county and we had to switch schools. And there was days when, these were the days before social media really started. So, every time I had this move, it was like I was cutting off any of my previous relationships and I was having to start fresh. Now, one day I think I knew where home was, and the next I'd pack my things into, whatever garbage bag we had, throw them into our car, our broke down hoopty, and, we drive to, our next temporary house. And to make matters worse, my parents got divorced when I was 8 years old, and so this introduced another layer of financial instability. And instead of having, the only good thing was instead of having, one crappy house and one hoopty, now we had 2 of both. And at one point, my mom was driving this old, busted-ass Ford Taurus, right? I wanted to send it in to pimp my ride and ask Exhibit for help. I don't know if you guys remember that show, but I wanted to send it in. I hated that car. It had chipped brown paint with rust underneath. The roof was falling in. It smelled. I hated it. I was embarrassed to be in it. And I'd have my mom drop me off down the street because I didn't want any of my friends to see me in it. It was awful. Now, one day when I was 9, my mom come to pick me up because my parents were divorced. And my sisters run in and they say, "Jamal, come quick, look, mom got a new car." I couldn't believe it. I didn't think my mom could afford a new car, but I thought, okay, well, I have hope. I went outside, and sure enough, my mom's standing next to this new car. I asked her, is this yours? And she says, she doesn't say anything. She just stood there, smiled, and unlocked the car. I will never forget it. I sprinted around this brand new shiny silver car, jumping up and down, screaming, "Yes, yes, yes." And after about a minute of jubilation, my sisters stop me and they say, "We got you, it's just a rental. Mom's car broke down." And I just lost it. I ran back into my dad's house, absolutely gutted from the disappointment. I jumped in the shower and I cried and I cried and I cried. Now, the shower has always been kind of my safe space because we didn't have a lot of space of our own when we were growing up. And though I don't cry as much as I probably need, the times I've really been able to let go have kind of occurred in the shower. And there's something about being vulnerable in the shower that kind of makes me feel safe. Like I can actually grieve with the running water blocking out the sounds of my sob and keeping the tears from drying on my cheeks. That day, I refused to come out of the shower. I shouted from the bathroom to everyone, even my mom, "I hate you. I hate you." I wasn't just upset that I had been tricked. For those few moments I danced around that new car, I thought, maybe our lives were actually improving. But instead, I was faced with the reality that we were poor and that we were probably always going to be poor. And it's not only that I was poor, but I was also black. I was one of a handful of black kids at my school. And these two things together made me feel like the epitome of the poor black man stereotype that we have here. And it's funny because, or it's funny when non-black people kind of think they know what it means to be black, right? And back then they thought they knew so well that they could tell me what it was that, or they could tell me that I wasn't being black because I didn't fit their expectations. Basically, I was too smart, or I talked with what I call a suburban, but they call a white accent. And people called me Carlton from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air because I was short and black, and I got good grades. I absolutely resented that. I hated it. And, I wanted to be Will, just with Carlton money. And what's more, I hated that there was this assumption that because I was black, I must smoke and drink. By smoke, I mean smoking weed. I felt like every week kids at parties were coming up to me and asking me, where's the weed at, or, where could I get some? But I wanted nothing to do with it. And a lot of that is because my parents habitually smoked or used marijuana throughout my entire childhood. Growing up, I knew weed cost money, and I knew my parents didn't have any. So it bothered me that my parents could somehow find money for, what I considered this extracurricular activity, while my siblings and I were, stuck using last year's clothing. And I know I sound ungrateful because, even though we constantly moved, we did always have a roof over our head and food in our bellies. Years later, I realized that this weed, or them using weed, was kind of a coping mechanism for, their own trials and tribulations in their lives. But growing up, I couldn't really ever get over the thought that if they didn't smoke, that somehow we could have a nice car, a big house, and I could have a real birthday party. And this financial instability kind of continued into my adult life. After I graduated high school, I drifted in and out of community colleges for a few years. When I first arrived at community college, I had my mandatory academic counseling meeting. With one glance, my career counselor, he looked at me and he knows everything he needed to know about me. Within 5 minutes and no conversation, he pushed me to a kinesiology major and selected all my classes and my professors for me. So, not surprisingly, I stuck with kinesiology for less than a semester because it was not really what I was passionate about. And I bounced around from major to major over the next few years. And while I was, all the while, I felt like no one really cared that I was lost and I was wasting time taking, one step forward and then 2 steps back. Eventually, I decided, I wasn't going to follow these paths that other people had laid down for me. Instead, I would take a leap of faith and I would apply to a university in London and, see what happened. And to my surprise, I was accepted, and, I would start school in January 2013. My hope in changing, to this new university was that, I'd expand my horizons and I would see what the world had to offer. And the world slapped the shit out of me. I showed up in London wide-eyed and hopeful that things were going to be different, that I'd finally have direction and stability, that I would finally feel proud about myself and, maybe even make some cash. But I realized pretty quickly that just because you move from one place where you have no money to another place doesn't mean that you're magically not poor. It just means that you're broke in a different place. So I arrived in London months prior to starting school, hoping, hoping to get things situated. And I wasn't supposed to get a job, but I had no money. So without many other options, I technically became a legal alien, working to save up money for a better future. The only job I was able to find, though, was working at a hostel. So I cleaned toilets, I washed dishes, I made beds. For 20 hours a week, I was getting paid £6 per hour, which is roughly, $7, $8 at the time. And this was all under the table. That wasn't really even enough for me to afford a bed at the hostel I was working at. So with no other choices, I couch surfed and I relied on the kindness of my few friends that I had made during my time in London to that point. To save cash, I'd sneak on and off of Tube, the subway over there, and I would walk miles to and from wherever I needed to go. I survived on basically peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, on white bread, and baby carrots because of vitamins. And once London's tourism season started to slow down, the hostel informed me they didn't need actually my assistance anymore. So just like that, I lost what little income I had. The only bright spot was this was only a couple of weeks before I was actually meant to start school. So I thought to myself, okay, fine. I was going to probably quit once I started school. So, this is okay. And like millions of Americans, to afford college, I had to take out student loans. So though I qualified for full financial aid because of my background, for reasons I won't get into tonight, my university didn't allocate me enough money to actually cover the cost of tuition, let alone cost of living. So my grind basically continued all the way through my undergrad. And to make matters worse, I picked a school that was not a good fit for me at all, at all. Now, I didn't know this when I transferred, but this school was rich. It was rich. It was full of oligarchs and future sultans and heirs to million-dollar fortunes. There were Lamborghinis and Bentleys and Ferraris in the parking lot. Uh, Kids, literally 17 and 18 years of age, were taking first-class flights to, snow trips in the Alps or, weekend trips in Ibiza. Every day, the school hallways were a fashion show for like the latest Louis Vuitton or Gucci or Prada clothing. And here I was, homeless, rocking the same three brandless outfits day after day after day. And the lowest point really came for me was, when I started sleeping in the library on campus. During exam periods, the library would actually stay open 24 hours, is pretty normal in universities. So, to save money, I did what I had to do. And if anyone asked, I was able to justify why I was staying there because I was studying. So I'd pick a corner in the back of the room, I'd unpack my backpack, I'd lay out some books from the shelves and, to make it look like I was studying and then settle down for the night. I would go days without showering at this time, and whenever I was able to shower, sometimes, I just lose it and sob. And both literally and figuratively, I would wash away the dirt from my life and try to start fresh every day. I was scared and alone and unwilling to tell my family or ask my family for financial support because at this time I knew they wouldn't be able to provide any help for me. And with them, I pretended everything was basically fine. They saw what I wanted them to see. I'd post pictures of me in front of Big Ben or selfies in front of Buckingham Palace, pictures of weird British bacon, just so that they, felt like everything was fine. At the same time, though, I refused to quit. I had this innate desire to persevere through these challenges in London because for me, this was far better than admitting I had failed and return back to the status quo of my life here in California. I knew that if I could make it through this uncertain time, I could make it through whatever life could throw at me. And when I look back, I'm proud not just because I was able to graduate with honors. I'm most proud because I was able to survive those dark days. And when the time came for me to tell my story to, admissions offices at top graduate schools around the country, top graduate schools, to my surprise, they listened. I ended up getting offers to master's programs around the world, in New York, in London, Beijing, and San Francisco. Eventually, I received my acceptance letter to UCSD, and when their letter arrived, it came with a little added benefit of a full academic scholarship. Yeah, thank you. Now, when that news arrived, I felt like 9-year-old Jamal again. My first thought was, is this real? Like, can this possibly be the truth? But it became clear pretty quickly that, there was no "we got you" moment. I swear I jumped so high in my little 64 square foot room that I almost hit my head on the ceiling. And this private celebration kind of went all through the night, because with this letter came a sense of pride that I'd previously never experienced. In all these moments I shared tonight, as well as those that I didn't have enough time to really talk about, I learned a lot. And since that first leap of faith 7 years ago, my life has completely changed. I proudly graduated from my master's program. I've been able to travel to 30 countries, spanning 5 continents, including living in China and in Germany. I've gone from clothes just stuffed in my garbage bags to neatly packed away in my luggage. I've started my own data and geospatial consulting company, though there's many failures that go along with that as well. But most importantly, I've been able to both quit and turn down high-paying jobs, all for the pursuit of happiness and love. And though my relationship with money has been less than ideal, my lack of reliance on it has meant that I've gone through things that many people have not been able to and will never experience themselves. Good and bad, I wouldn't change a thing, because for me, resilience is more valuable than any material possession. I take on risks because I've proven to myself that I can handle any of these extraordinary obstacles. I share my story because I hope to inspire and to inspire others to push boundaries and to achieve what they feel is impossible. And if you take, one thing away from my story tonight, I really hope that it's this. We spend most of our lives thinking we are not good enough, but trying to be perfect. Instead, let's spend a lot more time knowing we are good enough, though we are far from being perfect. My life has been full of ups and downs, twists and turns, unpredictability. 3 months ago, I would have never thought that I would be here standing in front of you all tonight. The only thing I know for certain is my life journey is far from being over. But who knows? Maybe one day Disney will want to tell my story. Thank you.
It's Jamal Russell Black.